I think I already have one, thank you.
I'll set it right here.
Want to join us over on
Here,
this side of the
right
table?
here.
Chance.
No. Get over here. I already said you'd be.
What is this, the Canadian version of the main hat?
I don't know.
So then-
It has to do with, the outfit that makes the, maple syrup.
Yeah, we
Oh,
have-
that makes sense, that makes sense, that's
How you doing?
nice.
I'm doing all right, man.
So you wanna, I see our audio is working. I
Starting video, should I?
got
No, I won't. And I think up here is the, that's where I would stop.
That's where you stop it, yeah.
Perfect.
Nights are getting cool. You leaving pretty soon?
Is that really what you're talking about?
No, we'll be
That's
here.
really interesting, so it's a three
We'll leave around the
sixty.
24th.
Yes, that's.
Oh, that's good.
Fancy.
Well,
Yeah.
For your.
Sarah, now.
So we have, we met, with
It's
the.
odd to see you, not one of
They
us.
used to be out of-
I know, on the other side of the table, so to speak. Okay, John, we've been gavelled in.
This, the owl listens to people. So if you're talking and you're talking, its head's gonna spin like an owl does and not know really what to do.
Gotcha,
So one person talking at a time.
okay. Got it.
Good. How's that?
But how do you know when the other person's going to talk?
Now that you're done talking, I'm good. No, you just have
You
to
say over at the end of when you're
There.
speaking.
just bear with it, you know, it can't do too much, so it tries to pick up everyone and it focuses on the person talking. So. Hey, good point. No.
Not yet, I know Anne's on her way, as is.
And Jeremy, when the time comes, I'd like to just introduce the three of us here, so for those who don't know us.
That, you're gonna have that right off the bat.
Okay.
Yep, no
Thank you.
problem, absolutely. Had a great adventure with your husband out to the island.
Yeah,
It's awesome.
Yeah.
My first time over there.
yeah, it's pretty,
No,
pretty serene and
yeah,
lovely.
Which one did you go to?
Curtis. I've never been over there and I've never checked out the house out there, the lighthouse, so very, very forward. So for people out there that may be watching, we're just waiting for another historic resources members, we have a forum.
How many are on the commission? 6?
There's five.
5.
No commission yet either, it's just a committee.
It's still just a committee, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Didn't make that grade yet.
Not yet.
Here's Anne. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, no, I love it. Got the beautiful bear.
Is that what it is? Or
Do you have one more coming?
We do, but we have one.
we're gonna hold off while we still got a minute, we'll wait to see if someone else. is coming.
Rhonda?
It's just that I thought we have seen him.
You saw him?
I think maybe. But, I'm on the surface of this study and I have some. From the ones from. Yeah. He's a preacher, I saw and see what. We don't have the evidence.
Yes, we-
Thank you.
they're all there.
Together, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, nice to meet you.
nice to meet you.
Hey, good to meet you.
Hi, Chris.
We're good to go.
All right. All right, I guess I'll start the meeting. My name is Jeremy Martin, I'm the Planning and Development Director in town. And obviously the code office. And what the Historic Resources Committee is doing today is there is a proposal to demolish a building at 59 Chestnut. And the town back in, when did you do this? Back in 2020, created a demolition review provision in our zoning ordinance. This is not a historic preservation ordinance. It is strictly a demolition review and a process on what has to happen if the property is going to be demolished in the historic district versus historic property. And that's why you're here today. It's 59 Chestnut. It's in the Chestnut Street Historic District. And again, there is a process. How this plays out is that a building, if someone wants to demolish a building in the historic district, it can get demolished. The committee does not have the authority to prohibit the demolition or stop it. It is a delay provision of 120 days, is what the ordinance says. It can be lessened or it can be waived. But that's the committee's decision on how to move forward. But there is a delay process. We just don't issue a permit for demolition in the code office like we used to. And the committee has relatively limited authority. Again, it's just it's a process for delaying it, and there's a provision in the ordinance that asks the applicant that they can seek different alternatives to the demo. Nothing mandates them to do that, but it's a demolition delay ordinance in essence is what it is. And this is 59 Chestnut, and we are being recorded. It's on YouTube Live, and we're on Zoom, and there's 2 people waiting in the room. Hold on 1 second. Thought I added someone, but maybe I didn't. And I'm adding Molly and Deborah. So I guess with that, Chris, being the chair, again, it's not a super formal thing because it's not a public hearing, if you will. It's a meeting, public meeting, about reviewing the demolition request. I can just start it if you want to let the applicants introduce themselves and introduce the project. That's kind of how these roll. This is, I think, the 3rd one or 4th one we've done. 3rd or 4th.
This will be the fourth.
This will be the 4th.
Oh, for
And just before we proceed, I do want to affirm that we do have a quorum. 4 of the 5 members of the committee are here.
Perfect, and I would just like to remind everyone, we're all on using this owl. And right now, how this works is the owl tends to follow the voice that's talking. So if people start talking over each other, I don't know if you follow select board meetings at times, it can be hard to follow because oftentimes people are talking at the same time and the owl kind of spins his head, not knowing who to focus on. So you can talk and then stop and then let someone else talk and try not to talk over each other. That would be very helpful.
Okay. I'd like to introduce our team of 3 to those who don't know us. Some of you do. We're Schultz and Barkley Architecture. I've been in practice in this community since 1972. Meg joined me as my partner. She's an architect also in 1990, was it?
1992.
1992. We've done, you can look at our website, Schultz and Barkley Architecture. We have done a number of historic restoration projects. We're known for doing them. Several, for example, in the area are the restoration rehabilitation under the federal standards to the Beech Nut Cottage in Rockport on top of the hill. Also, we did the addition to the Camden Library, and we also did the addition to the Belfast Library. All historic buildings. I just want to say before we get into this, that, that we take very seriously the restoration of buildings. We do not recommend the demolition of this building lightly. But you will hear more about that as we move along. On my left here is Chip Bauer, and Chip Bauer is the president, if you will, of Harbor Builders in Tennant's Harbor. He is one of the contractors that we use. He's a high quality residential contractor, does any number of projects for us. And Stacy Clark, the owner, has retained him to construct whatever is decided on, whatever we design, whatever it is. He has looked at the building. He has talked with Stacy extensively, and he is prepared to answer questions also regarding the structure. With that, I think that that's enough.
All right, and I guess I'm just gonna bring up what the committee has, the kind of your role here, and then I'm gonna hand it back to you kind of to go over what you're looking to do.
Sure.
And the reason for it. And I'm just reading from the code, the town code, this is chapter 290. This is in the permit required section. That's where we put this demolition review piece in here. What the committee needs to determine, because the 120-day review stay on demolition is in place. What the committee, and that can be waived, it can be lessened, or the 120-day stands. And how you get there is the committee needs to determine whether or not the building that is contemplated for demolition is deemed to be, if it's deemed to be non-contributing or not architecturally or historically significant, you can lessen or waive that 120 days. If you find that it is contributing and or significantly architecturally or historically significant, and the demolition will be final result, the 120 days stands. And at that time, then the architect or the applicant in this case would have to prepare a recordation, is how the ordinance reads. It's similar to what is required under the normal historic preservation ordinances, which is a historic recordation, and there's photographs taken and details given on what the building would provide for the town. And then that becomes a record so that the town has the record of the historic building that was there. Normally those are done in, if you do one per the Secretary of Interior standards, it's like archival black and white photographs, large format. It's so really, we don't require that. Just so you know, you can provide regular photographs, they don't need to be archival, but that's where we are. So that is the committee's role, is determining whether or not it's contributing and it's significant architecturally or historically. That's what we need to find.
May I ask a question? So in this recordation, are detailed measured drawings also required along with the photographs?
So I can just read what it says, and we tried to be very cognizant and understanding and sympathetic with applicants, because it can be very complicated and quite a process, as I'm sure you know.
Expensive.
And expensive. We understand that, and that's why we phrased it and used the wording we did. It says the applicant shall prepare and submit a historical building recordation of the property consistent with the intent of the Secretary of the Interior standards and guidelines for architectural and engineering documentation. The purpose of this recordation is to preserve an accurate record of historic properties that can be used in research and other historic preservation activities. That's what it says. And intent, I think, is, we will work with you on that. That comes down to the code office. We've been working with the last demolition that the committee reviewed, as I recall, was the on the church.
Episcopal.
Yeah, in the Episcopal church, that tower. And so we worked very, very, very hard with them to get that in place. And it was very challenging trying to find consultants that actually can do that work. Is challenging for people as well. So, and costly. So we understand, and we're trying to get to the intent of that, which is to preserve and at least have a recordation documentation that of what was there. So it doesn't need to, you don't need to cross every I, not every I, and cross every T, using the sector and tier standards, but just guess what you can. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
And I guess I hand it back to you because it's your project and the committee does have your application and your submittals and just all the detail on what you're.
I'm gonna hand it over to Meg.
Okay, so I'd like to talk about whether or not this house is in fact contributing in a historical sense, because the public interest, I believe, in historic districts is the exterior appearance of a building. I can tell you that the interior, most of the original detailing is gone. I don't know if you've had a chance to read your packets in my description, but
Absolutely.
for people who are in the audience, what once were, I'm sure, 3 large colonial fireplaces are gone, replaced by a single modern brick chimney. The original staircase is no longer in the house. The original windows are no longer in the house. There is some woodwork here and there. The entry door frame, the decorative molding around the entry door is definitely original, but has been compromised by that little Italianate swooping hood that's over the door. And about the only thing from my perspective that is of public interest on the outside of the building is that front door. And the overall shape of the building is obviously an historic shape. But other than that, the house over the years has had so many compromising activities performed upon it that I honestly don't know if record drawings are going to be worth something having in Camden's archives. So that's just a thought. The garage, which would also be demolished on the site, is sort of a 1940s novelty siding garage that is already collapsing. I mean, it's had some remedial posts stuffed in under it, but it's in very bad shape. And the house, unfortunately, inside is also not a particularly healthy environment because unfortunately, at some point in time, the electricity was cut off and the basement was allowed to flood because it's a very wet area. And the stone foundation is compromised. A lot of water came in through the bulkhead and through the stone foundation. There's tree roots growing in the basement. And there's been a lot of dampness that's gone up through the entire house. You look up on the ceiling in the basement, and there's mold growing on the underside of the floorboards. And so it's not a particularly healthy environment. And so the reason for demolition is we don't really feel there's much historic material worth saving besides probably like the frame structure that's underneath it, which, you know, you can't even see to draw the original frame. And I'll let Chip, who's done a, you know, contractor's view of inspecting the house, speak to what he feels about it too.
Go to
You
it.
want me to do that?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Well, definitely the house has been compromised in many ways over the years. And the fact that originally they were typically under frame to begin with, there are the issues that come about from that. And it's just a fair amount of work to bring it back to something and what that something is. And so as for costing, the bad news is it's less expensive to tear something like that down and go back to whatever they designed and keeping it the neighborhood or whatever. And so it is best for the client to do that, and for the health issues to take care of that moisture in the basement as a crumbling field stone foundation, which was classic of that time period. Well, you know, just to shore that up, whether it's from the inside or the outside, it's very close to the abutter on one side. And I don't think there's enough room to work to the exterior of it, but so those are just some of the many things that there's not a lot of charm in that building. Let's put it that way. And I've done many renovations and saving a lot of stuff over the years. And definitely lean toward that. There's a lot of waste in my business, which is sad. And new and old, and I hate tearing something down, but there are points where it is just the better move forward. Right?
I'd like to follow up with that also. One of the problems, if we did try to save it, is that the new, as Jeremy well knows, the new building codes that have been imposed or are now in effect in Maine require a high level of insulation and a high level of increase in structural engineering for buildings that was not in effect only maybe 5 years ago, really. And the level of insulation to get into those, if we did, for example, save those 2x4 walls, we would not be able to meet the code requirements for enough insulation in those walls. It would be a real expensive and very inefficient result. That's true of the rafters also, because the rafters are only what, 2x6?
Probably at the most like 4x6s. I mean,
Okay.
I haven't done measured drawings of the
Right.
house, so I don't know.
But they're roughly that. So that only leaves us 6 inches plus maybe some solid board insulation on the underside of that if we fill that whole cavity with insulation. And that does not get us up to the required insulation R value for the roof. So,
And the window openings on the second floor are too small for fire egress code.
That's
And so
true.
they would have to be changed out to casement windows so that a fireman could get in or a human could get out. So that would all compromise the look of the house even more than it already is if we tried to bring it up to code for safety.
okay,
Just for the record, I do want to note that I was presented with documentation that John and Meg are representing Stacy today, so I do have a letter to that effect. So
and she authorized us to represent her and
She wasn't able to be here today.
No, and she's also retained us as her architects.
Okay, great. I know that we are open to public question and comment. So are there any questions from?
I just have one, again, getting to the point that you guys need to determine whether or not this is contributing or not contributing. I just want to throw out, I think, John, you guys included, right, the National Register form.
We did.
Yes.
Right, and so, and just for clarifying purposes, this was done in 1991. And at the time, this is for the district, this is Chatham Street Historic District. There were 84 contributing buildings, or 85 and 5 non-contributing. And at the time in 91, it appears that this was one of the ones that was contributing. in
Yes, it
1991.
was. Consider that.
So I'm just pointing that out, that I think it's important to hear what the applicant had to say, but also what was, when this historic district was created, what was deemed contributing and approved by the Park Service and what was not. And in 91, this was contributing, just throwing that.
And if I may follow up on that, also what it says under that, Jeremy, not that, I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
But it also says right in here under the historic register comments on that building that the 1.5 story 5-bay cake situated on this lot is a federal ornament, but has been subsequently obscured by the addition of aluminum siding. A hood and transom light of Italianate design obscured the original federal pilaster capitals, which are visible beneath. The addition of the storm windows, as well as the addition of several interior brick chimneys, would appear to be a later addition too. The present facade is a modern alteration housing a true federal facade beneath. The rear L was added in 1945. End of quote.
Thank you for the clarification. So do we have any public comment question?
Yeah, is it gonna be shown if you demolish what you're gonna put there?
Well, we have,
That's client privilege.
well, but also we have not designed what will be there. I mean, it will be a residence with a garage, but we don't know what it will look like because we're in the very early days of design.
Right.
It will be a single family residence.
Can't do a cartoon or something like that. I didn't know there was an architectural client privilege.
Sure. Why not? I mean, the client has a right to,
Well, no, you're in the historic district, so, yeah, I'm just asking this question. I've never heard of it before, that's all.
Well, what I can say is the client is not interested in a modernist structure.
Yeah.
For sure. They're interested in something in a more historical style,
And again, just.
probably
this-
not a federal style, but a more historical style.
This meeting, this meeting is not to analyze the design. of
Okay,
the-
that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Specifically not to do that. We are specifically not to worry about.
No.
Future.
Right, at some point,
It's about the
and I don't know if
demolition.
this is happening, I know the historic committee has talked about it, about a historic preservation ordinance.
Yeah.
And historic preservation ordinances do look at, if a building's gonna get demolished and what goes back there.
Right.
And since we don't have that ordinance, there is no requirement and they haven't done that yet, we can't require it. Currently, if there's a federal undertaking, if there's federal funding involved,
Mhm.
and it doesn't happen on mortgages, it doesn't happen on residential single family homes. That's when, historic review gets done by the state historic preservation office. On behalf of the feds, but since it's not a federal undertaking, it's, and we have no historic preservation ordinance currently. There is no review of, by this committee or by the code office or anyone on what goes back in its place under the current regulations that the town has.
Okay, but this can, if we don't get, in spirit, you would, I take it, you want to put in a building that someone would put in times past.
Well, let's put it this way.
Not the machinery.
The materials, the roof slopes would be
Yeah.
something you would traditionally see
Yeah.
in that district. I mean, in that district, there are houses that range from 1800 into the 1920s and so on. So there's
Yeah.
a broad range of historical styles represented in the area. So,
Is there, and would you mind identifying yourself just for
Oh,
the
sorry,
record?
yeah, my name is Peter Brook, I live at 69 Chestnut.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Is there another comment or question in public?
Well, so I'm Jeff Pittman. We're at 57, so we're right next door. So we have in many ways probably a greater interest in what goes on over there than most everybody else. All lands in difficult territory, because one of the reasons we're there was because it was a historical neighborhood. For the record, the house across the street was built by my great-great-grandfather before it was knocked down. Anyway, it's currently there, in my mind, doesn't fit the neighborhood at all. And so for us, this is probably the overwhelming concern, is how things fit with the neighborhood. Obviously, what goes on will be of interest to us as we go forward. But it seems to me that more than anything is we're looking at trying to keep Chestnut Street or what's left of it in some kind of a context that's comfortable. I understand all of the arguments for saving, not saving. As a builder, I know that many things can be done, sometimes not cheap, sometimes not easy. If one really wanted to preserve that house, or at least the bones of it, and work from there, it can be done. I do think, I noticed in your notes that you said the water penetration was, was a vain attempt of putting plastic around and stop that. For clarification, that was put there to try to keep the cold air from moving.
oh, was it?
So, mostly because the previous tenants found out just how much it cost to heat. My experience with the neighborhood is that the groundwater issue is probably the bigger problem, and a great deal of that has to do with the water coming down the street. anything that's gonna go back in that footprint is gonna be sitting in a pool of water and will have to be dealt with. I think it's crazy to try to pursue a totally historic preservation of it, because we would have to draw some kind of ambiguous line, and you would end up with a structure that was not terribly efficient. In this day and age, I think energy efficiency is probably pretty high on the list of important things. So, I can't say that I would stand in the way of knocking the place down. I'd be bitterly disappointed. I hate to see a 200-year-old building that stood the test of time, that still has good bones, just thrown away. So, I find myself in a very uncomfortable position. And so again, I think much like we're having some idea of whether we're going to land back in something that fits the neighborhood or not is probably much more of a big determining factor in how you feel. And so I would love to be in the loop. Anyway, I have not much more to add.
Thank you very much.
All right, oh, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if I don't really understand this process I don't need to. I'm an oral historian and a mother and a grandmother and a writer and a gardener. And I live next door to what was the Littlefield house built by Ephraim Barrett in a very long time ago. And his son built our house, which has undergone probably as many, if not more, permutational changes than the Littlefield house. And it used to be the barber shop. My living room had a barber chair in it. We don't know what goes on behind people's houses. They could be blown out with, Robert Mapplethorpe art on the wall. We don't know. But I think I totally understand what you're saying, and I don't think this is the place for argument plus or minus. I'm just putting in my feedback. A couple of things. It's important what things look like, and God knows we're now staring at things that look like Darth Vader's helmet and other things that do not belong in a classical New England architectural mode. But I'm concerned with history, not just the look. And if the town were more, maybe we don't want to be as much like York, where you can't even paint your front door without consent, but there's a history to these buildings. And when you look them up, you have a world, and we're losing worlds every day. We're losing plants, we're losing animals, and we're losing history. And in America, we haven't paid much attention to history, and thank God for Northern New England, because we like to think we have. When the Fry House was taken down, it was a nightmare. It was a mistake. It was horrible. And then they died after they did it. It didn't even have to be done. They didn't even live there very long. And, that was just a shame to lose that place. They were sea captains buried out on North Haven, and they came in here and built this house. And, I'm interested in history and preserving history. I'm also interested in keeping my garden. It's not an easy place to garden, and it's a southern window. And if she builds something too tall, I'm screwed. So there's a lot going on for us, and who we are and how we live and how we see the neighborhood and how we see preservation. And I understand the problems, but it would seem to me that some of those should have been known before it was bought. As they told the owner, well, as we think they told the owner, that it was not going to be torn down. And I don't know, I wasn't there for that conversation, but I guess that's my beef stew.
Thank you.
Well, maybe Jeremy can speak to this better. He might know the code better off the top of his head than I do. But as far as shade on your house, so what the Camden ordinance requires is when a building is non-conforming, which in fact the existing house is,
And the garage.
it is very close to your property line. Within the 15 feet between your property line and the house, that portion of what is there, whether it is renovated or rebuilt, cannot exceed more than 30% of its area or volume. So there's not going to be anything tall right next to your property line.
That's sort of second, that's not really secondary, but
Yeah, so that's, you know,
reassuring on that level. There's a lot of other levels, but thank you for that. I know there's a 15-foot on both sides.
yes, that's true.
And I don't know, I guess if you don't build on the same footprint, you have to, you can build on the same footprint, but if you don't, then it has to be, how does that work? 15 on,
So whatever part you rebuild on that old footprint, that cannot be, for instance, taller than 30% taller than it already is. Which would, you know, describe like the volume situation if you used exactly the same footprint. I mean, you might like make it shorter and a little bit more taller, you know, there'd be different ways to do the math. But simply, if it was using the exact same footprint, the part in the 15% would not be more than 30% taller as a kind of general concept.
I think, I'm sorry, I think we maybe we're drilling down into. design
Yeah,
details,
it's,
but-
yeah, and we haven't designed the place yet. I mean, we're still working with the owner, like, how many bedrooms do you really want? That's where we are right now in the process, so.
Question related to her question, if you build, and I just went through a whole restoration of my house, so I know a lot of these things come up, but my understanding was if you completely rebuild, you have to fit the new regulations, and so even if you built on the footprint, if you had tore the whole house down and rebuilt on that footprint, would you have to follow the current setbacks?
No,
Okay,
You would actually, depending on it all depends on when you rebuild. That nonconformity doesn't last forever. So, it's
so if they
really,
rebuilt on the original footprint, they would not be in the current setback requirements. They would not.
it all depends on when they rebuild. I think Shenley, off the top of my head,
year.
I think it's
2 years,
I believe it's a year.
a year.
So
Mhm.
that all.
Okay, but if it's done within a year, then.
really, if you tore it down tomorrow, you would need to replace it, the footprint, before a year was out.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
I'm sorry, I'm not on video, so I can't do this. I'm sorry, you finished, ma'am? Because I can't tell what the etiquette is. My name is Deborah Brook. I'm Witter Brook's wife. I live at 69 Chestnut Street, and I just want to agree with everything that everybody has just said, all my neighbors. We moved here almost 10 years ago. We love this house. We love the historical nature of the house. And, you know, look, Rosalie and Chris have told us a lot about it. And we happen to live in a house that a lot of people really love because of its diamond windows. And my husband and I have actually been having a fight about, you know, replacing them or not. So, and I'm putting my foot down and saying we're not. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The thing is, I mean, we love this because even though the houses don't look the same, they look similar. When we're really afraid, I mean, and when all of a sudden one day we were couple doors up from us, there was this loud sound and they were knocking down a small historic building. And then the next thing we knew, Howard Johnson's was there. And I don't know if you know the building I'm referring to. It's right next to the Camden Harbor Inn. And my fear is that more of that happens. It happened in Rockport. It's happened to our street. People come to Chestnut Street. I mean, visitors come to Chestnut Street because it's Chestnut Street and they can see all these beautiful old houses. Same with High Street. I just want to put my 2 cents in and thank everybody else who spoken and say that I stand with them. So if that.
Well-
And also, I want to ask I have one other question, one other question. It says, in the application, the demolition permit, it says, building of new structures using same footprints. What I've been hearing is that you're not going to be necessarily be using the same footprints. You're kind of swiggling around it. And so I'm concerned that, you're going to, we have construction going on next door, and he's not doing, I don't know what his permit says, because it's not displayed, but we're very concerned about the fact that, we don't want to see more houses that are, ours is 1902, but it has an 1800 house in it. But anyway, it's later, for the historic district, it's 1902. So we don't want to see more houses that look more like the one up the street than what the one here does. That was just.
Well, Deborah, if it makes you feel any better, I can't say what this house exactly is gonna look like, if we have to work that out with the owner. But I find the house to which you're referring inappropriate for the street myself. In the fact that it's not square to the street and the metallic orange quality. So it's, it won't look anything like that, I can assure you.
I second that.
This is a nod to the need for perhaps a historical preservation area.
Also, I might add, I think we are staying to the same footprint.
Well, we won't go any closer to the property lines. We may make more use of the area between the current house and the current garage.
Right, but the exterior footprint of the two structures would be.
We have a neighbor who's decided to keep the existing garage that was not the original to the house next to us. We live next to the Captain Parker house. And that's now being renovated. And there's a garage that's sitting right on our property line.
Well, guys have done it, never had a permit.
I mean, I would, if I were their neighbors, I would, and you say you're gonna use same footprint. To me, same footprint, and you're not gonna do anything to,
We will not be getting any closer to the property lines than the current buildings are. That is for certain.
Yeah. I think it's important to remember what authority this committee has. That's important. I think everyone's point well taken. I think Chris's comment about historic preservation ordinance, that's well taken. I think that would address most all of everyone's concerns. If we had something like that in town, we don't currently. It doesn't mean we're not going to at some point, but currently the process that we have is really about determining whether or not this is contributing or not contributing, whether or not it's architecturally and historically significant or not. And then that's what the committee needs to focus on. All these other things are very important, certainly, valued. I mean, I was a historic preservation officer in the city of Bangor for a long time, so I get it and I appreciate it and value it. But we are bound by what we have in place. As far as history and your concern and your appreciation for history, I will say the ordinance does say that the owner should work with interested parties in salvaging, recycling, and reuse of as many building materials as possible. I know some contractors and architects have come back to this and said, well, that's really hard to do. We don't want anyone on the property, because of liability issues, so people can't be there, but I think it's important for the committee to, address the applicant with this point and the builder, that when you get to that point, work with interested folks and people and make some of these building materials salvageable for other people to use. I mean, I think everyone gets, you go to the lumber store now, lumberyard now, and you buy, a 2x4 that's not even 1 3/4 anymore, it seems. And it's yellow pine out of Georgia that lasts maybe 20 years. The wood that this house is made of is old growth and is very dense, and will last likely for generations to come on an interior application, right? So I think it's just important that they recognize that the committee has that right to ask them to try to work to salvage that stuff and provide it to other people.
In relation to that, I just was wondering, is it a post and beam structure?
I have to assume that it is.
I would assume
It-
that it is.
Yes, I have to
So there
assume
is
that
some
it is.
value to some builders for post and beam.
Materials.
Materials.
And some of the doors in the interior, I can tell, are old colonial doors that someone might really like to have one of those doors, whether to use it as a piece of art on their wall or to actually install it.
That was,
I
wondering
just have
also,
one more
yeah.
general comment that doesn't have to do with recycling materials. That my concern is that every loss in a historic district diminishes the historic district to some degree. And I know Jeremy wants to move on to other things, but it is something to think about, that we've lost a few houses on Chestnut Street recently. And it's just that dripping, you know, that I'm concerned about. And I know historic preservation ordinance can take care of that, but I just felt like I wanted to make that general statement, you know.
you addressed the first thing I was gonna ask, which is the preservation of materials. Are the stairwell element something also that has some historical significance? And do you have any plan in place for preserving materials that in the demolition?
So we don't have any plan yet. I mean, Chip can speak to that because he would be in charge of making salvage materials available. That would be up to him. The stairwell itself, I'm gonna say that, well, the railing height, the actual balusters are so short that this railing would be unsafe for anyone to install those balusters in any way other than a decorative way. The newel post is, I'd say, 1880s to 1910. It's a kind of a cool newel post. You know, the railing hand gripping part is kind of nice. But, you know, that's really the salvageable part of the railing. There is a bunch of interior trim, but it's, you know, caked with lead paint. It's going to be a hazard to remove because that's when the paint is all going to flake off and everyone's going to be exposed. So there's always that issue. Where a door, you can just take off its hinges and you deal with the lead paint at your own house, kind of an issue. So,
Okay. I know there's questions
Yeah.
from the committee.
Yeah, I just wanted to focus on the exterior a little bit more. I must admit, I did research on you and I know you were the chair of the Historic
I was
Resources
for
Committee.
many a year.
And which I gave me quite a bit of pause because I said, she's really got to be thinking about.
No,
this."
I hate tearing anything
Yeah.
down. And this
Right.
house is,
We both do.
it's
Right.
very,
Really?
this house is in very sad shape, unfortunately.
And having, I didn't always have this gray hair, but I just went through a 15-month restoration of a house on Pearl Street. So, we faced a lot of things like this. And what gave me pause was, well, I should back up just a minute because I also totally agree with you that it's the exterior that matters the most. The interior to me is a reflection of the families that have lived in the house over these years. But the exterior is something different. And so what gave me pause was in the 1991 application, when they talked about that there is a true federal facade beneath. We had the same situation where we had aluminum siding that was put on, I don't know who came through in the 1970s and put aluminum siding on everything. And there was so much detail underneath that we were lucky enough that I had done research and knew that the house next door was built by the brother-in-law of this house, and they had their trim. We had the space that showed where the trim was. And so when I read that, I wondered if you have explored that to see what is underneath that siding, because this seems to make it seem that all really still exists and it's underneath the siding.
Well, I'll say this about that. What is the era of your house?
1888.
That was a heavily detailed era. So federal buildings were in general very sparely detailed. So a great example is the house just uphill. That's the Colonial Cape, and it still has its central chimney. It still has its like 9/6 windows. And you'll notice in that house that actually the federal door trim has been changed to an Italianate door trim. And you can see the old federal trim is just peeking out above it, but it still has the dentil molding. And that was like the only federal trim left on the house. And it probably didn't have much in the way of elaborate trim because these were
Yeah,
not
and I wouldn't expect,
wealthy homes.
yeah, being federal, I wouldn't expect it to be
Yeah,
elaborate,
so,
but I
so
just
really the
wondered-
front door trim
Yeah,
is the only feature. You can see what the trim of the frieze was, and it was a flat trim. And there's a kind of a cove and return molding that's still there at the top of that trim. And you can see on the rake trim, there's been a bead put in the trim of the rake board. But my guess is everything else that's under there is flat trim and clappers.
yeah, but no one has taken it off to see.
No, no one's
what
peeled
they're
off the
talking
aluminum,
about
and it may
is
well
still
be rotten, because
Yeah.
what will happen in a house like this, what the moisture from the house is gonna migrate out and be trapped by the aluminum. And then it's gonna be condensed against the clappers and it's gonna rot the clappers, unfortunately.
Yeah, we had some same things. Luckily, we had really good clappers still underneath there.
That's
Um,
amazing.
Yeah, it was, but that's because, I wondered if there was a way of preserving, you know, that facade, that if it was still the original, and if you had just checked on that.
No, we haven't looked under the
Yeah.
aluminum.
Wouldn't it be the case to say a house was built in 1810, by 1840, the facade might be, at least the detail around the facade might have changed a bit, because taste changed.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we aren't the
And
first
it's
era
certainly
to have modernized our houses.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
Yeah, because I did notice that this house is, well, and then I have trouble with this anyway, because the house is listed as being 1800, and there's only 5 houses in the historic district that are older than that. And then there are another 4 that are listed as 1800. But I will say from all the research I've done, because I'm researching Jacobs Avenue for historic district
Oh.
listing, those figures are not right. So there's always that little fear in my mind because of who built this house, that this house could be even older. It could be one of the oldest houses in the town. And it would take a bit of digging to figure that out.
And even at 1800, it's
It's
the
still one of-
20th oldest house in Camden. It's the 6th oldest on the street, but the
Yeah.
20th oldest.
I know you know all that. She's expert.
Yes.
Yeah, so, yes, I have, a question about the recordation that has to happen if there's a delay, if there's a demolition delay. It seems like that shouldn't be an either or. It seems as though the recordation of what the house looked like originally should be done, whether or not there's a delay.
well, just so you know, it wouldn't be what the house looked like originally. It'll be what the house looks like now, because the original is in my imagination
Mhm.
and, you know, from my education. But I can only record what is there. And what is there, there's not much to record because I cannot see what is underneath all this stuff.
I believe the ordinance reads that this needs to be created whether or not there is a delay, if there is demolition.
I can read from it.
Yes.
So, during the 120-day period, the owner is encouraged to work with the Historic Resource Committee and other interested parties to explore possible alternatives to demo. Owners are encouraged to seek alternative options that will preserve, rehabilitate, restore, or move such buildings. Nothing requires them to do that. It just says that they're encouraged. And then 120-day delay period may be lessened or waived if it's determined that the building or portion thereof that is contemplated for demo is deemed to be non-contributing or not architecturally or historically significant. The committee may make recommendations in this regard to the code officer, who then may waive or lessen the prescribed 120-day delay period. No, we didn't talk about recordation in either of those two sections, so if we're waiving it, it's really about, the way I see it, is about whether or not you determine it to be contributing or not. Because if you find it contributing or architecturally or historically significant, then E, that's E. If it's deemed to be contributing or significant architecturally or historically, and demolition will be the final result. Prior to issuance of the demo permit, the owner or the applicant shall prepare and submit a historical building recordation of the property consistent with the intent of Secretary of Interior. So if you find that it's not contributing or not architecturally or historically significant, then we can waive, the code officer can waive or less than a 120-day period, but there is no requirement for a recordation to be done. The recordation only happens under the ordinance if you find it to be contributing.
Yeah,
So that's the ultimate question, I think.
so it is a contributing structure according to the National Register.
According to the 1991 application that went to the Park Service to create the Chestnut Street Historic District, it was included as a contributing property at the time. Yes.
Right. I'm actually speaking as an archivist, because what I think is important for a town like Camden or any town that has such treasures in it, that you want to know what their history is and what they, as much as possible, what it was that had to be taken out or didn't have to be taken out, depending on you know, how you would go with that, but.
So just like if you want a concept of what you might be burdening the owner with, for me to just produce record drawings is about 80 hours of work, and you can do the math on that. So it would be an expensive ask just for the sake of having a record of a compromised building. So that's a decision that is in your guys' hands.
Well, you have done so much work already in discovering what the, you know, original parts of the interior and the exterior are. That it seems as though just maybe even some sketches of what, as you say, my imagination. Well, you know, you have a lot of material here to go from. To have a few sketches to, you know, to put in the archives would be, you know, wonderful to know if it disappears, what it looked like. I mean, we've got the photographs of what it looks like now from the outside.
Well, and I did get that one photograph.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's from a real estate photo and it's not very crisp. I don't know where the realtor got that photo, perhaps from the owner.
Very
is all I can
interesting.
think. And I was like, oh, I did. I checked the library archives online anyway, and that photograph was not from the library archives. So perhaps it was from the owner's
old
family.
tax records, I think.
But we should check the WPA photos. Because they came through in the 1930s and it's gonna be.
And so, you know, that's a little blurry, but you can tell by the quality of the photo that it was probably a photo from the 1940s or 50s. And there's those large elm trees, I assume, based on their shape. We can only see the bottoms of them outside that look like they were planted when the house was built. They're massive. So, I mean, that's all that I would have to go by of what it originally looked like. But the question is it really an archival document if I just make up what it looked like in my imagination, which it's not? It's, you know, it's kind of.
I think you need to stick with where you were describing as what you would do if you did a recordation. I don't think you can do a
right.
recordation on what's in your mind.
No, I mean, I would have, well, just for starters, so that you know what I'm going to need to do anyway. I need to measure up the basic volume of the exterior of the house because it's non-conforming. So I need the information of its overall size and shape, you know, all, of course, add windows and things. But do I need to measure up all where the walls and the toilets and everything are now, when things have been moved around? There's a modern kitchen in the house, and all that would be part of an official, real record set of drawings of existing conditions, which seems like a lot of expense of something that's not even interesting.
Right.
That
Can
would be- that
can
would
we
be-
tell you just exterior versus interior? I mean, I'm totally with you on the interior is not, but the
No,
exterior.
the
is-
interior has been changed so
Yeah.
much that,
I'm most concerned about what remains under the front of that aluminum siding. Because this tells me that they said it was there. And that's very, very possible that somebody came and slapped siding across everything and did not remove it. Just stuck siding on it.
Oh, I'm quite certain that what's under the siding, like they didn't bother to take
Oh, no, they
anything.
don't.
Well, we'll get back to what our actual recommendations, but,
Sorry.
it's weird. I had a couple questions. I'm curious about the 120-day delay. Does that impact your schedule or not?
Not at all, not at all. We haven't even designed what's going there, so our overarching plan would be perhaps a fall 2024 start.
Okay.
So,
In the survey, I saw the call out with the wetlands. Now, that is not at all,
Yes.
part of this discussion, but it did make me want to ask, is there gonna be any analysis of that?
Yes,
yes, and we actually were over there today with a landscape architect to discuss.
we have retained a landscape architect who's well qualified. It's Carroll Associates.
And no building will go in the stream setback at all. There might be like a corner of a set of back steps or something that impinges, but that would be it.
And John, I know that you said you've gotten some responses from neighbors, and we have neighbors here today. Have you heard, have you gotten input from neighbors and what kind of response or concerns that have been raised that maybe haven't been raised today, or?
No, not other than what we've heard today.
When he said they had responses, it just meant we got the receipts back from the certified.
Yeah,
mail.
so, yeah, we got the mail, we got these 5 of 6 mailed receipts back from the abutters. And, but yes, we have retained a qualified landscape architect who has longstanding history in the state. It's Pat Carroll and Associates out of Portland. And they're working on 2 other projects in town for us, which are also quote historic buildings. I think I can name those public record. One's the Hawthorne Inn. We're renovating the Hawthorne Inn for the new owners. And we're also will be renovating the 117 Bayview Street, which is opposite Lake Park. It's a Greek Revival House. And those are the in-town projects that we will be working on over the next several years here.
Great. Pat, I know you have a question.
I was just gonna ask Chip, do you think there's any person who might be interested in moving that building if it's post and beam?
They're difficult to find. We've been trying to do, there used to be 10 years ago, there is no longer. A couple, there was 2 different outfits that were really good at that, taking it down. There's a lot of power post beagle damage in the house that we're talking about. So we're talking about keeping that frame. And say something familiar with an older buildings around that area. There is definitely visible signs of that, but there is no longer. There used to be that gentleman out in, what was it?
Well, Baxter Cook.
Baxter,
Yeah, Baxter Cook, he
and
used
there's
to,
Nobleboro movers.
yeah, and
That used to come and take them down and be interested in them. They no longer do, they no longer have the manpower to do it, and just.
and there's several
It's
historic,
sad because, there are the places in 17 that used to take old doors and things along that line. Modern stuff can go to Habitat for Humanity, but anything worth salvaging, we do try to pull it out and put it back into the system somehow. We'll make an effort on that, but there is limitations to it.
and just again to follow up with what Chip's saying, over the years, and on our website, there's several houses there, historic houses, one out in Appleton, that was a 3rd generation house, beautiful house. And the grandson of the first gentleman who owned it, I don't know how long ago, that was that we did that house, but we took the house and the barn. And it had a granite foundation, stones. And Baxter Cook, this building mover that Chip's talking about, took the house and we rolled the house back from the road because the road had gotten wider and wider, so it was literally in the front door. We took that house and we took the buildings together and they rolled that house back into the field overlooking Sennebec Lake, about 400 feet. And we put it on a new foundation, same geometric form that it was. And we created a new link in the middle of it because the link had collapsed. The old farmhouse link had collapsed. And the building is there today. And it's one of, it came out a great project.
But that was a house where all the original detail was still there, all the faux painted doors, wainscoting, everything, old fireplaces. It was
It was
amazing.
amazing.
So it was worth the expense of moving it. And it was,
Chris, do you make that or Chris, you?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
There's one, yeah, that's.
I just wish, I guess if you walk up the street and notice when there are additions, they go behind instead of the sides, you'd be inclined to do that. I don't know if you have the dry land to do it up there.
We don't,
You don't, okay.
because there's a stream out back
Right,
there.
that's what I was.
So-
Double question.
you're obviously familiar with the property.
Yeah.
So you can picture the garage in your mind.
Mhm.
The back town side corner of the garage, the stream setback is like a couple feet off that back
Right.
corner of the garage. It is right there.
They can't do what everybody else did.
No, the most we would get is, the most we might be able to get, which is suggested by the landscape architect, is called, what Jeremy can explain to you. The DEP will give a permit by rule for certain things to invade that 75-foot setback, but they're not
Like your
gonna,
back
but
patio.
but like your back patio, a terrace or something, but they're not gonna
Not a
give,
piece of
but
house.
not a piece of house. No, you're not gonna get that.
Mhm.
Oh, a couple of, the owner owns it, right?
Yes, the
Yes.
owner purchased it.
So it's time
This
for a
summer.
little destructive investigation.
What?
So.
Oh, destructive investigation.
Some destructive investigation. One thing, those little capes and all that, if you take it all apart, the frame might be in really good shape.
Yeah, and
And
they might be
easily
numbered.
dismantled and can be moved, someone put back together. So
Well, Chris,
we've
that-
done that numerous times.
yeah, no, that's.
But, but what you say in here somewhere, I thought it said that you're gonna reuse the old foundation, but then it says you're going to approximate location of the existing house.
Right.
So the only thing, so there's really nothing that protects the context of the neighborhood. I call it spooky hollow down through there. But the only thing that protects that, the context of that, you could put anything in there as long as it meets the zoning ordinance for that.
Right.
So.
The only thing honestly protecting the look is our taste and the owner's taste, to be
And,
quite frank.
And then you have all the pictures of all the houses in the neighborhood, except for the 1-2 doors of the way. But they all show a small scale, and all those little houses are in the context, the scale context of that neighborhood in that part. of the
But
block.
there are full two-story
So we
houses.
So we're
nearby.
not guaranteed that that context will remain in place when it's torn down
Well,
and replaced with something.
well,
We can only go so high.
right, you can only
I
go
know,
so
But
high.
there's nothing that's even approaching height,
Oh,
the
that's,
maximum height in that
Oh,
oh,
area.
yes, there are.
Yes,
Across
there are.
the street and just uphill, they're full two-story houses everywhere in that neighborhood. Yes,
That's what I'm saying, but this is a 1.5 story.
yes, no,
No, but we can go
probably
low-
within
inflated.
the center of the thing, we will need to go 2 stories in order to meet the owner's program, but bedrooms, on the second floor.
Ours.
That was the house that almost was torn down, right? Your house is usually the tall, like,
The one that's, the one that basically, the house next door is 7 the boy, it's got the column porch,
okay,
so, but it's, yeah, I mean, it's.
I don't do numbers very well.
It does have 2 story, yeah. Yeah. But.
Well, I think you have done a wonderful job with what you've given.
Oh, well,
The
thank you.
public and given us, with discovering quite a bit about the house. That I'm sure that there are many people who want to just tear down a house like that without the descriptions that you have. And I just would encourage some way, to have even a simple plan of how the chimney was originally and how the stairs went originally and how that what you said about the facade, that isn't too well visible from that old photograph, just something that would represent that.
But the truth is, I don't know what the chimney and the fireplaces really would have been. I just know that they probably would have been. I mean, it's the classic Cape design is
Yes.
you enter, you're faced with a stair that's, perpendicular to you. You go around and there are 3 massive fireplaces.
Right.
There might have been a hiding cupboard in between
Mhm.
the chimney masses for hiding from marauding British soldiers. I mean, there all those things might have been possible, but I don't know that that was true.
So much of this is about the fireplaces is supposition.
It's supposition, but that was the normal, if you look at classic Cape design, that's how they were designed.
Yeah.
And then in Victorian times, everyone was like, well, why are we burning, 12 cords of wood when we could have a wood stove? This is ridiculous. And so they went to wood stoves. So,
And we can make a fair assumption, Rosalie, about the fireplace configuration that Meg is talking about, because in the basement, the foundation, the old foundation of what the original chimney was, is there.
right, there's these brick wing
There's
walls in the
this
basement
brick
that
wing.
clearly supported a lot of masonry
Mm.
that's no longer there.
So it does inform us that there were probably 3 chimneys in there.
Ah.
Well, not 3 chimneys, but 3 fireplaces, because often they
All went together.
They
They all went
often,
together.
it went together, which is not allowed today.
There's a wonderful story by Melville called I and My Chimney. And it's a story basically about his wife wanting to modernize this 1800 house that they have in Western Massachusetts. And he doesn't want that to happen because he loves his one big chimney and fireplaces around it in the center. And she wants to make different chimneys on either side end of the house. And it's just really wonderful if you get a chance to read that. But that's what made me think, my gosh, this would have been very different with the central chimney.
It would have.
I'm gonna ask that we move to deliberation and there are more comments. I have a recommendation and would love for the committee to respond. It's listening to what was presented today. It's my opinion that this is a historically significant property. It was contributing, while its character may have changed to a gray area of is it now non-contributing. I would suggest that we find it significant, architecturally significant, and therefore ask for the recordization. But other than that, grant the demolition on that basis, and also request, although it's not really part of our purview, that there is consideration to, as much as possible, reusing materials that are as it permits, and also if the historical plaque could be returned as part of the demolition. So that would be my recommendations, and I'm just curious what the committee thinks of that.
Could it be altered to not include the interior recordation? This interior is not historically significant.
I can't hear you. I'm
Fine by
sorry.
me. I mean, I think the applicant demonstrated that. I think
Yeah.
he probably supported that. That's fine by me.
To alter it so that it doesn't include interior recordation.
That would be, I would be on board with that, yeah.
No, that it should not have.
It should not have interior recordation
The
because.
interior.
Interior.
Oh, the in, yeah.
Yeah.
Not of the
Interiors have
interior.
changed.
And kind of to your concern, Anne, you know, I don't know the formal recordization process, but I would love some record of, when you do remove that siding, what do you find there? And I don't know if that could be.
Well, that'd be nice to photograph that when once it's under in the process, but to do that prematurely would just add to the deterioration of the house, and the look of the street in the meantime would be maybe.
Well, the other problem with that is the minute we did something like that, that would trigger the 1 year build start problem.
Hmm.
And we don't want to, and that, we don't want to do that till we're actually ready to start building. So if we start pulling the place apart early, then we're locked into that 1 year.
I think it's when the building, it's really when the building goes away. That's how I see it. When that footprint, when that building is demolished off that site, you can still do work on that. You can still do investigation.
So we would be allowed to remove the siding,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't hold us to the year.
Correct.
Oh,
Correct, because that building's
Okay.
still there.
all right, all right. Well, that's good to know. I mean, if you're on board with that.
Yeah, I mean, the downside of removing the siding a little early is the house could look just terrible for a year, you know, while you're looking at peely siding, you know.
And deteriorate more.
That might help
Yeah,
the cause.
yeah. The people on the street won't care if you remove the siding.
So what does the rest of the committee think of the,
Well, I would second your recommendation.
Chris?
Oh, I too will second. It's, Chip knows that this, whenever you come into one of these projects, the contractor always says, you gotta tear it down. You gotta tear it down. And they argue and go on, and it doesn't get torn down, and they love all the wonderful work that they've done afterwards. But this time is one time that I do agree that it's not worth the effort to build it back to where it is now. They don't build them like they used to, and that's an oftentimes that's a pretty good idea. So,
Well, it is, yeah.
but anyway, I think
Most or all of
it should be documented, and we should know where it stands within our historic district and all that.
Okay, so I think what we're finding here is, you know, a grant of the permit as for our purview, yeah.
With my provisos that they don't have to record the interior,
Exactly, with the recordization
And
of the
but
exterior.
that we do find what's underneath that siding.
Mhm.
If there's anything left that we
But
definitely.
if you want to use your imagination to do to put down where the original chimney was and that.
Well, I say for anyone, you should knock on the door of the house up the street, because it's probably exactly what it was.
Well,
On the Cape, I mean,
Yeah, the Cape with the green
Yeah.
shutters.
do we know that that was an 18?
That's like 1810.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, chances are it's very similar. Slight difference in detailing, but I think that they're probably twins.
I'll check with Kim Gross.
That, actually, there's, I mean, the person who did our house did have, usually they come in, you know, groups of 2 or 3. On that.
Well, and they were all done from plan books generally back.
Yeah. Mhm.
It's like, well, do you want this front door or that front
Right, yeah.
door, you know, kind of a
All
thing.
right, so
I'll
I'm gonna,
have Dover.
let's make this a formal motion and amendment that we are approving. And that we are requesting recordization of the exterior. And that we're asking for you to try and I'm gonna actually quote here. As much as possible, salvage, recycle, and reuse materials. And if you can record the property before and after demo.
I think what he means there is taking photographs as suggested, and once the aluminum siding comes off.
Return the plaque.
And return
Okay,
the plaque.
do I have a second for,
I second
okay, let's vote on that. All in favor? Aye. That's 4, none opposed.
Okay,
Terrific. Thank you for your time and hearing us out, because
This is
it's,
nicely done here. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Very well done.
One thing, it's funny, these upside down stairs, 7-inch risers,
Yes,
9-inch
yeah.
treads.
Yeah.
7-inch treads.
Yeah.
But if you look in the picture, it foreshortens it.
Yeah.
It really, the steps, the stairs, the risers get huger as it goes.
Yeah, they do. They
Well,
do.
And the railing comes out to that.
Well, when you're
I almost
on the
fell down.
landing on the second floor, it's scary. I mean, the railing is barely taller than my knee. I mean, I know people were short back then, but that's really low.
It is what it is.
I lived up at 95 and we had a stair much like that. And it's great for getting in a box and sliding down. The doors. Not
All right. Can we adjourn the meeting?